Good morning.
Good morning, ma'am. Good morning. Good morning, Tejas sir.
Good morning.
Rugini.
Good morning,
Kurush
sir.
sir. Morning. Jamkhedkar sir. Morning. Namaskar.
Namaskar, namaskar.
Pleasure to see you. Morning, everyone.
Ragde sir, namaskar. म्युझियम
सर
टुरिझमच्या दृष्टीने हे पोटेन्शियल कसं असावं, तुमचे इनपुट्स महत्वाचे आहेत.
Shall we start? Dr. Kurush Dalal, please.
I think we are waiting for Dr. Mukherjee, no?
No, we are not waiting for him. He will join.
Garge sir, shall we start then?
Sure.
Chalo. So welcome everybody to this first meeting for the Maharashtra State Museum proposed by the Directorate of Archaeology and Museums, Maharashtra State. And we're very, very happy to welcome all the delegates and all those who are interested parties and who have signed up for this. I'm here purely in my capacity just now as the director of the INSTUCEN School of Archaeology to welcome you all. INSTUCEN has been given the great honor of facilitating this conference for the Maharashtra State and for the Directorate, for which we are very thankful. And we hope that everything will go smoothly and that we will have a museum very, very soon. Thank you very much, everybody, for being with us. Please keep your mics muted and only put up your hands when you want to speak. Otherwise, our volunteers will be forced to mute people here so that everybody can hear the speakers. And a very, very warm welcome to the government, to the directorate, and to everybody who is over here, especially all the experts who have been called in. Thank you very, very much.
Dr. Thakare is to speak now.
Over to Dr. Thakare.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, okay, thank you. A very good morning to distinguished guests, speakers, and participants. As you are all aware that the state of Maharashtra, it historically leads in the public museum movement with a wide presence of museums at the various levels in the state. However, for a long, a need to set up a museum of a world-class standard, showing the rich culture and heritage of Maharashtra and its larger connection with the world by following the accepted standard practices and norms in the field, it was felt by us all. So as a result, following the directions of the Honorable Minister, Cultural Affairs, Maharashtra State, a standard proposal for setting up the Maharashtra State Museum was submitted by the Directorate of Archaeology and Museums. And it swiftly culminated into forming an expert advisory committee, which will provide its expert opinion and consultations to the government in this regard. So immediately to invite larger public opinion and to facilitate the expert committee to hold discussions, it was envisioned by the Directorate to organize a series of seminars, mostly through the online mode due to the present pandemic situation. And considering the expertise of the INSTUCEN in organizing the online seminars, the Directorate collaborated with INSTUCEN, which has resulted into this first online consultative seminar on the Maharashtra State Museum. Today, the distinguished speakers from the expert committee, they will be presenting their concept and vision for the proposed Maharashtra State Museum, followed by an interaction session where the public participants, they can too provide their inputs in brief and can interact with the expert committee members and Directorate on this topic. So I take this opportunity to thank all distinguished dignitaries in the Government of Maharashtra as well as in INSTUCEN for their timely support and cooperation. And I now officially welcome you all to this brainstorming on the very dream project, very dear to us all, that is the Maharashtra State Museum. Thank you and wish you a good day now. Now I pass on the baton to Dr. Dalal. Dr. Dalal, thank you.
So thank you very, very much, Dr. Thakare, for that. I think we had the Secretary Cultural Affairs coming in, but he won't be able to make it. So I will then pass on the baton now to Dr. Mugdha Karnik for her welcoming remarks to those who are organized over here. Thank you very much, Mugdha ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Garge. Thank you, the D.O.A.M, for involving India Study Center, INSTUCEN, in this program. As you know very well, and therefore you have invited us, we are very much into public archaeology, and museums are all but public archaeology. I mean, it's everything about public archaeology. And it's really a welcome step that you have started this initiative, and you have involved, your secretary has involved the public in the discussion, and we are absolutely happy to facilitate. Whenever you want to do any such program in future also, we are there to support and help. INSTUCEN has so far in this on lockdown period has done a lot about archaeology with the D.O.A.M. So many courses, I think some 60 courses in the field of archaeology have been carried out with the D.O.A.M. And well, we are taking archaeology to the public. And most of these participants here are also from our group. Of course, there are so many other people also participating in this seminar because of their interest in the museums. But there are many people who are who have recently become interested in archaeology. They are not archaeologists, but they definitely have this strong love for archaeology and heritage conservation. So therefore, we are here together and we will take this ahead. Dr. Garge, thank you once again. Thank the Government of Maharashtra also. And in near future, maybe 5 years down the line, we should see something happening about the State Museum. That's what is our expectation is. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karnik, for that. And I now hand it over to the man of the hour himself, Dr. Tejas Garge, who will be talking to us about the Maharashtra State Museum. And as director of the Directorate of Archaeology and Museums, Maharashtra, he is the man in the hot seat at the moment. Thank you very much, Dr. Garge. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for being part of this. First of all, I would like to thank Sabysachi Mukherjee, actually, who is not here at the moment. Our
Sir,
secretary.
he's here.
He's here? Oh,
yes,
good
sir.
morning, sir. Good morning, sir. Great to have you. Thank you for joining. So first of all, let me thank Mr. Saurabh Vijay, who is Secretary Culture, and who took this initiative of the flagship project. Actually, we're considering various ideas and projects for 15th Finance Commission. And it was Honorable Secretary who suggested that you should have a flagship program or flagship project. This usual conservation or upgradation of older museums is a routine part. So you should come up with something innovative. And as somebody who has served Archaeological Survey of India for about 13 years, and I happened to visit many states in India. And what I could see out of my experience that there were many state museums dedicated to the culture, history, and archaeology of that particular state. And to my surprise, this factor was completely missing in Maharashtra. And let me tell you that many people felt that Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya or C.S.M.V.S or the former Prince of Wales Museum was considered as the state museum by many people. Not too many people know that it is basically run by a trust. Of course, government is also part of it. There's a participation of government, but it is not a state museum. So a need of our was felt, and we proposed the State Museum for the 15 finance plan, and there is allocation of some funds, about 50 crores as a first installment is expected. And if we look at Bihar Museum, I thank and welcome Anjani Kumar Singh ji, who is representing Bihar Museum today. So truly, your museum has been an inspiration to all of us who are looking forward to do something towards the development of museums. So your museum itself is an inspiration. And I thank and welcome Dr. Arvind Jamkhedkar, who is Chairman I.C.H.R. And he was the first director after our department was bifurcated from archives. And he has a long experience of working in the field of archaeology art. So his inputs over this are going to be vital. And please let me tell you very frankly, I'm not the first one to come up with this so-called innovative idea. This particular idea was also proposed by Dr. Jamkhedkar when Honorable Vilasarji Deshmukh, our late minister in the center, at that point of time he was minister culture, state minister culture. So a government resolution was also passed on during Jamkhedkarji's time for the state museum, but unfortunately it did not materialize due to changing policies. So inputs and experience of Dr. Jamkhedkar is going to be vital for us. I'm not sure whether Professor Shinde had joined today, but I hope to take his opinion and inputs in future. Dr. Shinde is my guru. He was my guide for PhD research, and he has a long experience of working in the field of archaeology with international, national exposure. So his inputs are going to be very important. I welcome Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya, who is likely to join us soon, who is not only the regional director of Archaeological Survey of India, but somebody who is born in Nagpur, who understands the spirit of Maharashtra, culture of Maharashtra, and how it should be represented through archaeological objects. So she has quite clear ideas about our project, and I hope to have great inputs and help from Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya Sahu in future. Uh, Dr. Shiv Prasad Khene, Director, Nehru Center. It's always pleasure to interact with you, sir. Your enthusiasm and ideas have always led us to new directions. So your presence is welcome here. I look forward for your inputs. Commodore Odokal Johnson, Maritime History Society, is a companion, friend, philosopher, guide when it comes to maritime heritage. And Maharashtra do enjoy a long coastline. So your inputs will be very vital here, sir. Then I also welcome Amiteshwar Jha, Dr. Sabre from Deccan College, Dr. Manjari Kamath, Dr. Neelambari Jagtap, Dr. Rajesh Ragde, uh, Dr. Preeti Trivedi from Nagpur University, Dr. Aparna Vatve, she is a botanist, and this is not only going to be Museum of Archaeology, but it has to have a collective representation of our views from all subjects. So I also welcome Dr. Aparna Vatve here. And then we have architects, Professor Chaya, Mr. Rahul Kadri. Then we also have experts in form of Mrs. Betul Raj Mehta. So I welcome everybody. I think Dr. Rajesh Ragde from Aurangabad is also here, and we expect this museum to be also developed from perspective of tourism. So his inputs are going to be very vital. I think let me start with a formal presentation. I will not take much time, and this is only projected idea, but what I am expecting based upon this idea, how we can develop this further, how this committee can express its collective view and collective opinion about formation of State Museum of Maharashtra. So I would request Riddhi to share a PPT, please.
Yes, sir. So can you see the screen?
Yes, thank you. So, in Maharashtra, there are many organizations whose abbreviation leads with Maha something something, Maha IT, Maha Cargo. On similar lines, this is a tentative nomenclature, the Maha Museum or Maha Sangrahalaya, which is likely to change in future. But for now, officially, we are calling this project as State Museum of Maharashtra or Maharashtra Rajya Sangrahalaya. Next slide, please. So, apart from all these details, basically, department was called as a Directorate of Archives and Archaeology, which was formulated in 1955, and in 1977 we got bifurcated from archaeology, and since then we are known as Directorate of Archaeology and Museums. So museums also became part of our duty list since then, and we are trying to serve our level best. Next, please. So if you look at other works of Directorate, it's basically like any other department of archaeology which is engaged into excavations, explorations. We did conduct excavations at Nagardhan quite extensively, and there are a lot of archaeological remains which will be ultimately housed in a museum or they'll be displayed. So sources of our material, a large part of that source is formed by explorations and excavations. Next slide, please. Conservation of protected monuments is a major job of our job profile, which we have been doing. Almost three-fourth of our funds are dedicated for the conservation of monuments, and remaining funds are diverted towards upgradation of the existing 13 museums. Next slide, please. So, just like monuments, objects kept in the museum, they also need to be conserved. There has been many attempts of conservation in past. We had agreement with NRLC, who did wonderful job in Sangli Museum. Then we are also in tie-up with C.S.M.V.S Museum, and we are likely to do some conservation work with them. But right now we are working with some of the best people who are in private conservation, and along with them, in past few years, we have managed to conserve many of the important paintings. For example, this portrait of a Malayali woman by Raja Ravi Verma, which received a lot of appreciation among the scientific community, academia, and common public. Next, please. So in all, we have 13 museums. Let me take you through them one by one. Next slide, please. So I'm going region-wise. So if you look at Konkan, we only have a single museum in form of regional museum at Ratnagiri, which is also known as Thiba Museum, because the last king of Myanmar was kept prisoner here. This particular structure was built as a jail. It's almost like a palatial structure where he spent last years of his life. So very few objects from his personal use are displayed over there, and remaining objects, they are basically sculptures from Konkan area, few paintings, photographs, and recently we have conceived a proposal to upgrade this entire museum, which will also have a maritime gallery with small models of ships, Western ships as well as Indian ships with their information and diorama and so on. Next, please. Then there's a regional museum at Nasik, which is housed in one protected monument called Sarkarwada. and it has got range of sculptures all across the country, because many of the items are transferred from custom department to the collection of this Sakarwada or Nashik Museum. It has got also a section on weapons, then metal sculptures, and now we are also acquiring collection of few local artists who have recorded a large number of monuments and ghats in and around Nasik. Next, please. Then there's a regional museum at Aurangabad. It is also housed in one of the uh, protected monuments called Soneri Mahal. So one can see weaponry, glass paintings, stone sculptures, metal sculptures, Satavahana artifacts, archaeological artifacts from many excavated sites in and around Aurangabad region or northern Marathwada. So this is also a rich museum, and unfortunately, due to its limitations of physical expanse, now there is no more space for display. Uh, Next, please. And Python is a famous archaeological site in Aurangabad district. There we have a local museum, collection of a local person who donated all these objects to government. So Shri Balasaheb Patil Regional Museum, mostly antiquities from Python itself. Next, please. And there's a regional museum at Sinkhedwaja. Though this is basically dedicated to Maratha history, as this is the place of Lakhoji Raje Jadhav, who was father of Jizabai, mother of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. So, but there's also heavy duty collection of Yadav period artifacts, because Sinkhid Raja was rich in terms of uh, temples, barrows, and sculptural remains throughout the history. So there's a good collection of Yadava sculptures at Sinkhid Raja. Next, please. This is one of the important museums or important collection of Directorate. There is one famous archaeological site which had connections with Roman trade and so on. So unfortunately, its existing building is very small. So and in dilapidated condition. Here we have mostly collections donated by late Ramlingappa Lamtureji, who donated all the objects collected by him from region of Ter itself. So it's basically terracotta objects, kaolin, other archaeological remains excavated from the sites in subsequent excavations, few stone sculptures, and so on. Next slide, please. So recently, 3 years back, Government of Maharashtra sanctioned a new building, which would cost us about 16 crores. And I'm really thankful to government for sanctioning this, because you can see condition of the existing building right now. So we're in desperate need of upgradation of this. So the construction work is ongoing in full swing, and we are hoping to have this building in 3 to 4 years of time. Next slide, please. And again, a wonderful collection taken on loan from C.S.M.V.S Museum, Mumbai. Basically, weaponry, and there's also few glass painting, miniature paintings at Satara. Recently, we have completed documentation of all the weapons, and we are hoping to come up with a catalog and documentary on Satara Museum. Next, please. And this is one of the most important museums under Directorate, Shri Bhavani Library and Museum at Aun. And this was again acquisition from Balasaheb Pant Pratinidhi, who had created this museum so that his rayat, or praja should have a proper taste in art. So there's a huge collection of European art, and he also patronized many famous painters like Ravi Verma and so on. So there's a wonderful collection of 19th, 20th century art at Aun, and there's also one original sculpture by Henry Moore. So Aun is quite important for us. Next slide, please. There's also a regional museum at Sangli. Again, this is also acquisition from a princely state. So this was a princely state of Patvardhans, and they also have very important paintings created by Dhurandhar Muller. Again, one of the best representation of Bombay School of Art is housed in Sangli. And there are also a few important sculptures. For example, this sculpture of Shri by late Karnik. Next, please. There are two museums in Kolhapur, a town hall museum, which was basically created to house objects from archaeological excavations. For example, you can see this Poseidon or this Toykat cast in bronze is found from excavations at Brahmapuri, that is Kolhapur. And again, there's a full range of stone sculptures from historical period, colonial era, then other artifacts from excavations, and again paintings of 20th and 21st century. So this small compact museum also represents very important collection with the Directorate. Next, please. Again, Chandrakant Mandre Museum from Kolhapur, dedicated to creations of one artist who donated all his creations to government, and now it is named after him. He was also a famous film artist. Next, please. Then again, a central museum from Nagpur, which was creation of colonial times, is also one of the most important museums of Directorate of Archaeology. It has got a various range of artifacts from sculptures to weapons to modern paintings. So you name it and you have it in the Nagpur Museum. So there's a great range of objects in terms of material variety and dynastic representation. So Nagpur is also one great source of our artifacts. So next slide, please. There's a small museum at Mahur created with collection of local artifacts of stone and also representation of Banjaras who reside in the same area. Next slide, please. So with all this, at the moment, we have about 50,000 antiquities on display and then a reserve collection. So tentatively, we have about 75,000 artifacts with us. And of course, we could be drawing from this lot, and as well as there's a great need of curation for the present idea. And again, inspiration remained all these museums which are already in existence in Orissa, Bhopal, Jharkhand, Goa. I also served in Mizoram. So a small compact state museum at Mizoram was also an inspiration for me. In UP State Museum, Tripura, I mentioned Bihar several times, and I might be mentioning that again and again. I used to stay next to Assam State Museum, and I used to wonder when we will be having Maharashtra State Museum. And I never even dreamed that I could prove instrumental one day in formation of this idea. So there's a state museum at Himachal, Telangana, Manipur, Nagaland, Arunachal, Meghalaya, and Punjab. And one of the progressive states like Maharashtra does not have a state museum. We are not part of these 15 museums which are already there in existence. Next slide, please. So these are a few examples of existing state museums which are inspiring us to come up with State Museum of Maharashtra. Next. Assam State Museum. Next. You can see palaces converted into a museum in Tripura. Next. Next. So let me come to the theme of the present deliberations, that is concept for the State Museum of Maharashtra. Next, please. So, of course, when we are trying to showcase entire state of Maharashtra in one space in form of a building, so before we jump to cultural landscape, we should have a proper idea about its geographical context. And that is not only geography, but also geology, formation of these Western Ghats, then entire ecology, atmosphere, that has to be represented in one gallery or in one area, so that people get a proper idea of its natural context. So the further development of cultural landscape is easily understood by the people. That's why we have experts like Dr. Aparna Vatve here, and I'm hoping to have few more. Next, please. So after a proper geological context, I think there should be proper representation of early human cultures in Maharashtra. So in Maharashtra, there was a properly developed Stone Age, and humans have been inhabiting here since long. So there is a proper Lower Paleolithic, Upper Paleolithic, Middle Paleolithic, Mesolithic. Everything is represented in form of stone tools, and there's a great information and collection of all this with Deccan College. So we are hoping to coordinate with them in development of dioramas or more audio, electronic audio visual aid or something to represent our prehistoric culture. Then another great source is Nagpur excavation branch, prehistory branch of Archaeological Survey of India, which is the only branch of prehistoric studies which has conducted exploration throughout the country, and it is based in Nagpur. Next slide, please. They have also worked in Maharashtra and has a lot of collection of artifacts too. So we are also hoping to have some help from them. And recently we conducted explorations in Konkan, and we found these great evidences of rock art engraved on lateritic plateaus. So that also had changed our perspective about understanding of art history in Maharashtra. Whenever we spoke of art history, we always began our deliberations from either Pitalkhora or Ajanta. And we spoke of some motifs painted on Chalcolithic pottery, but we never went beyond Chalcolithic period while discussing art in Maharashtra. From many these petroglyph sites, we have recovered microlith, which are probably dated to Mesolithic period, and now we are also excavating few sites, prehistoric sites, to establish this chronological connection between petroglyphs and microlithic tools. So this is going back quite long in time. It almost go back to 20,000 BC, according to some expert, but we are still confirming it. And some of the scholars, they opine that this belongs to new Chalcolithic transition. So still this is much more older than Ajanta and Ellora, and that should be also properly represented in our state museum. So whomsoever visit, he should get inspired to visit these archaeological sites. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So these are certain ideas how we are going to develop our prehistoric gallery, but these are random ideas. We need to formulate them according to the material evidence found from the Maharashtra, and I'll be also looking forward for your inputs. Next, please. And even these prehistoric galleries should have a global context. So how human evolution has taken place, where do India fits into this human evolution and development of prehistoric cultures, and then in as compared to India, how Maharashtra Stonehenge has contributed to it. So I think it should always have a global context, that where we stand in the world, even in prehistoric times, that should be properly represented. That is the idea. Next, please. Then we come to Chalcolithic period. There is an absence of classical Neolithic age in Maharashtra. So there are several Chalcolithic and megalithic sites which are excavated, and material from them is housed in Nagpur Excavation Branch plus Nagpur University and Deccan College. But very few of the artifacts are represented in respective museums. There's a great collection of megalithic artifacts in Deccan College as well. Next, please. And this is a replica from Deccan College Museum of Inamgaon. So why not to recreate a Chalcolithic village inside museum building itself? Because if those huts are made out of wattle and daub, and it's hard to maintain them open to air. So again, inspiration comes from Manav Sangrahalaya Bhopal, where they have conserved original houses from various parts of the country. So there could be a good attempt of recreation of this village based upon excavated remains. Next, please. Now we have two choices. First, whether we should go by dynastic representation. Next, please. Either we can represent the entire history of each dynasty, for example, Satavahanas, through recreation of some of the panels, or if at all there is some pieces of loose rock art which are kept in some other museum. For example, Yaksha from Pitalkhora is housed in National Museum. If we have similar artifacts which can be kept in museum, or replicas of some of the important inscriptions, and some miniatures of rock cut, or some of the to the scale recreation of wooden buildings upon which the designs of this rocket architecture was based. So there are so many ideas, and luckily we are rich in early historical artifacts. There are sites like Ter or Nagardhan, from which there are a lot of Satvahana artifacts. So there is a proper collection which we have in hand, which could represent this Satvahana era really well, including coins. Next, please. So similarly, there are again Satvahana artifacts. Next, please. Again, Directorate of Archaeology worked on a lot of Wakatak sites, and a lot of evidences related to Vakataka dynasty, which were contemporary to Imperial Guptas, in form of rock cut architecture, as well as archaeological evidences in form of palatial buildings, temples, and habitation sites, and of course, great art. So again, we can replicate which is not detachable, or what is detachable, if possible, some of the important artifacts. For example, a ceiling of Prabhavati Gupta, which was found from the excavations at Nagadhan, can be part of our collection representing Vakataka dynasty. Next slide, please. Again, later periods, similar idea can be adopted. Next slide, please. Now we have a lot of evidences of construction of temples. Next. Many temples shown here, they belong to Yadav period. So we also have construction of fortifications starting from Yadav period, and later on it expanded in Sultanate and later medieval period. Next, please. And at the same time, we witness evidence of Bhakti movement, which has actually formed present character of Maharashtra. I think in our thought process, we cannot marginalize evidence coming from Bhakti movement. So we can definitely do deliberations how this can be a part of the museum. It can be in form of audiovisual formats or dioramas, or now with some modern technology of representing these characters. So idea is to perpetuate, remind this philosophy to new generation in simple manner. Next, please. Now there's a great evidence of built architecture from Deccan or Maharashtra in form of architecture during Sultanate period. So you also have a lot of artifacts associated with this period in form of coins, weapons, pottery, and so on, which has actually changed the character of the land. So now you see rise of Islam, development of other languages, and development of something like Dakkani, Urdu. Next slide, please. Then representation of Maratha period, when Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj founded Maratha kingdom. So there could be separate galleries dedicated to very few artifacts from this particular era. Unfortunately, archaeologically, we are not rich from this particular era, but definitely there can be representation of this era in form of miniature creation of forts and dioramas and few more digital display techniques. Next slide, please. Of course, this particular kingdom was expanded throughout the Indian subcontinent during Peshwa period. So, representation of Peshwas. Next, please. Then, after British rule was witnessed in Maharashtra, there were two centers of social reforms. One was Bengal and another was Maharashtra. And I think their thought process, their philosophy has also contributed to the present day character of Maharashtra. So their representations in form of sculptures, dioramas, or availability of their material or information panels, we can deliberate on that. But this could be also one dedicated gallery on that. Next slide, please. Then there's a great freedom movement, and a lot of personalities from Maharashtra has contributed to our freedom struggle of our great nation. So a separate gallery dedicated to them, if we are lucky enough to find some of the original artifacts used by them, or else we can represent them by sculptures and by informing creation of information panels of what they actually did for the country. Next slide, please. Then, of course, representation of modern Maharashtra after independence is very important. And though it is not done in any part of the country, but there is also concept of a dedicated chief minister's gallery and representation of each chief minister by display information panels, pictures, or a sculpture in similar style, and will keep scope for further expansion in this gallery. Next slide, please. There are also very important personalities besides politicians and social reformers who has contributed to present cultural scenario of Maharashtra. Many of the Bharat Ratna awardees, or many people who have actually ruled hearts of the people, and who were also responsible for development in many other sectors of Maharashtra. Their representation through sculptures, photographs, or something on the lines of the famous Madame Tussauds Gallery is can also be discussed. Next slide, please. And luckily, we have Professor Manjari Kamath here, who is expert in industrialization, and Maharashtra is known for this. So, industrial history of Maharashtra should also be well represented in some form. Next slide, please. Of course, there is a separate museum, national museum, dedicated to Indian cinema. If you haven't still seen it, please visit Bombay. I mean Mumbai. This is located in Pedro Road, and this is one of the best created museums on Bollywood so far. A gallery also can be dedicated to the same theme. Next slide, please. We have a strong tribal base. The culture has also contributed in existing culture of Maharashtra, which is inseparable. Dr. Jamkhedkar has suggested us to have a separate project on Gonds from Central India. So again, whether we can do something beyond collection and representation of tribal object, whether we are able to see their representation through archaeological artifacts and show development in their social formation and how they became part of the main social stream of Maharashtra. That is also one interesting process to study. And I thank Dr. Jamkhedkar for contributing to this line of thinking. Next slide, please. Besides dynastic, these are also some of the alternative ideas. Next slide, please. Sorry, I have taken a little more time, but I think it was important to put forward all these ideas for discussion. We need to use modern technology. Next, virtual reality. We can give view of some of the best locations in Maharashtra in form of virtual reality in some of the galleries. Then whether we should have separate dynastic galleries representing that era with say coins, sculptures, or shall we have different dedicated galleries representing all dynastic eras or political eras of Maharashtra? for example, a dedicated sculpture gallery. So these are already some of the well set examples of other museums throughout the globe. Next slide, please. Then again, visual arts form a very important role. We have a great collection of Bombay School of Art, which also remains important part of modern art movement in India. So do we definitely need to have dedicated galleries for that. Next slide, please. Next slide. Textile also forms an important part. So development of textile in Maharashtra through archaeological evidences, and again by combining it to the modern period, one can have a great display on the same. Next slide, please. So art and crafts, again in context of 20th and 21st century, or overall development of art and crafts in Maharashtra, there could be several thematic displays. Next slide, please. So weaponry also forms one of the important parts of our assemblages in the museum. So we can also have some dedicated galleries for people who are more interested in those segments. Next slide, please. Next. Next slide, please. Yeah. So shall we have some galleries which are again shows development of architecture throughout the times scale in Maharashtra, or shall that be a part of that particular dynastic period? This also needs to be discussed. Next, please. Next slide, please.
Sir, I've already changed it. I think it's taking time to appear on the screen.
Sure. Thank you, Didi. So, musical traditions in Maharashtra is a great part of our cultural life. So, I think there should be interactive gallery dedicated to the theme of drama, performing arts, and music. Next, please. Of course, I mentioned natural history in the beginning. The gallery dedicated to the same theme. Next, please. Again, this forms an important part of any museum which has got a combined collection. So modern art installations, we can invite something new from the artists who are working in the contemporary world. We can also take help of JJ School of Arts or some of the leading art institutions in Maharashtra. Next slide, please. What I realized after staying in Patna Museum, the children's section was a great hit. And literally mothers had to force those kids to take out of that particular section. So we need to have a huge space, interactive space for children, to make them understand in some interactive way some games. INSTUCEN Trust already worked on some of the ancient games. So we can have some of the dedicated galleries where children can actually play those ancient games or there could be good use of modern technology to make all these themes very simple and interactive. Next slide, please. So again, same theme, interactive spaces for kids. Next. And it is also important to create displays and facilities for visually impaired or disabled people. So the entire collection has some sort of universal accessibility. So we need to also come up with the technologies and ideas of displays where everybody can enjoy, feel this museum. Next slide, please. So, well, this was only concept, and this is open to discussion for experts as well as public who is participating here through registration. And on official scale, this subject was brought to the notice of the Honorable Deputy Chief Minister Ajit Dada Pawarji, and he gave his consent. He is also Finance Minister of the Maharashtra. So he gave his consent and he appreciated this idea. Then our Honorable Minister for Culture, he supported and guided us a lot in this direction. And he also suggested to have an expert committee so that it should not be a singular idea of the government, which government is trying to impose upon public, but he felt that it should be more interactive. And I'm thankful to present Secretary Culture, Mr. Saurabh Vijay, who suggested this idea of deliberations on online platform and formation of this advisory committee for this museum. So with the support, a government resolution was passed inviting all of you to be part of these deliberations. Now, what we are expecting that these deliberations are also being recorded. So your views will be part of our record, and we will be also inviting your suggestions through email, and that all will be formulated as a part of recommendations to the government while passing this concept of State Museum of Maharashtra. So it has to have our collective vision of the professionals and public who are interested in this particular segment of development of museum and development of cultural spaces in Maharashtra. So I thank everyone to be part of it. And now I declare that this forum is open for discussion. So next slide. So thank you very much. Sorry, I have taken a little more time than it was allotted to me. So I hand over the mic to Dr. Kurush Dalal. Thank you so much. And Riddhi, maybe you can stop presentation.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Garge, for taking us through the history, the archaeology, and the story of Maharashtra in so many different ways. So I think the scope now is very well defined for us. And I think we can now hand over the baton to Dr. Sabysachi Mukherjee if he is here with us. And he can now take the floor and give us his views. So Dr. Mukherjee, please.
Thank you, Kurush. Tejas, it was an enriching experience. So much to see and learn. And we are all very proud of our state, our history, our culture. I take this opportunity to thank the Government of Maharashtra and the State Ministry of Culture for their joint initiative for setting up a state-level museum in Maharashtra with a global vision. Thanks to the Secretary, Culture, and the Director of Museums and Archaeology and the team for organizing the first meeting cum discussion session. I would also like to thank all members for participating in the session. The question arises in our mind, why do we need a state-level museum in Maharashtra when we have so many museums, 13, 14 museums? The answer is very simple. We need a large museum that houses 2 million years old history of Maharashtra from prehistory to modern Maharashtra under the single roof. Today, what we saw, Tejas gave us wonderful presentation, 13 state museums in different regions, and the collection is scattered all over. You don't get to see and learn the history of Maharashtra under a single roof. So this is what we want, under a single roof. As we all know, the history of Maharashtra, and this is something very important when we conceptualize, the history of Maharashtra is glorious, painful, and full of surprises. Ensure all these elements reflect in our museum presentation, not always the glory part, because the painful part also an integral part of our history, and people of this generation, they would like to know that part of history. A museum that should be able to speak to its public in particular and the wider world in general about the history of the region and its connection with the rest of the world. And Maharashtra was well connected with the rest of the world. Dr. Jamkhedkar is there, he knows, and everyone knows from 3rd century BC. Let's understand the concept of a museum. The concept of museum in its broader sense defines who we are as a people, our biodiversity, monuments and artifacts, behavior and attitudes of the world in which we are living, and the way we are living and the way we think and look at, learn and communicate. So it is no longer as merely repositories. That is what, please, don't look at museums as repositories of antiquities. No, it's not a godown. It is an institute. Centers of informal education and civic space for social interaction. So the concept of museum is changing with the changing time. And we all know that museum is not a building or object, but an idea. It transforms our consciousness, expand our sense and sensibilities, and help us to perceive the time and space we are living in. Neil MacGregor, the former director of British Museum, describes this situation. The whole point, I quote, the whole point about museum is that they help you to sort out your place in the world. It is in a museum that you can look at your past and think about your relation to it. That is more important now than it has been for a long time. As the world gets more global and the history of identity gets more complicated, it is important to have places where everyone can come and look at themselves, their history, their stories, and future. Now, coming to the question of setting up a state-level museum, which has emerged from the state aspiration. The challenge will be, before the Directorate of Museums and the authority, taking a stand between the local aspiration and global aspiration. Because we are living in a globalized world. And my answer will be think global, act local, a balancing act. This is important because museum plays an important role in the cultural, social, and economic development. Economic development, it was not in our dictionary, but from tourism point of view, you have to look at of society and making sincere efforts. All museums are making sincere efforts to fulfill this function. Then how do we begin? My suggestion, the department invest considerable amount of time to define the institutional vision. That is so important. It's not an easy task. If possible, they involve professionals. It has to be a collective vision. Now, what is vision? A vision knows who you are and where you are going. A vision defines what an organization stands for and why it exists. It also defines what the organization aspires to become, its goals, and what significant changes are required to achieve the same. This is going to be the first task. And I request, the director of museums to take this initiative, involving people, understanding their aspiration, noting down, putting all ideas together, and then make a statement that this is what we look for. So we understand institutional vision, your vision, and then we think in a different direction, and that is so important. Then the second task, understanding 5 major steps. For setting up a museum, 5 major steps you need to follow. What is that? What are those steps? A, location. Location is important. Your museum should not be away from civilization. If some land is available outside the city, no. Then project is going to fail. And we experience that. I can give you, number of projects. And this is what happened. So you have to see, and you have to make our ministers understand that this is our identity. The museum is our identity, and it has to be in a city, in a prime space. So minimum land, I'm just saying that minimum, if you can add more, it's good. 15 acres you need for Maharashtra Museum. I'm not saying Maharashtra. Bihar was very clever. They said Bihar Museum, and I liked it. And I was very much involved from the day one. I'm still with the Bihar Museum on advisory committee. Anjani Babu is here, and we too are on the advisory committee, Anjani Babu and myself. So we can call it, Maharashtra Museum. And then the second point, the second step, collection. You cannot have a museum without collection. Collection is the core. And the moment, you constitute a separate content committee, narrative, the committee prepares narrative, you also start searching for collection. And then the third important step, building. It has to be contemporary architecture and should be considered as landmark. Look at Bihar, Maharashtra, we always consider progressive state and one of the richest states in the country. And Bihar's vision, they did not compromise. And Anjani Babu will share how they involved international level architect and the resistance from local politicians, even the High Court. But they were determined to move ahead. So this is important. And that building, as I said, it's not a building. Museum is not a building or object, an idea. And that will remain. We all will perish, but museum will stay, museum will survive. Then the fourth step, exhibition, modern display by using modern lighting and interpretation systems. Most of our government museums failed miserably because of presentation. Presentation style, presentation approach, the 3-line information, and no narrative. No narrative, lighting concept we could not develop, unfortunately. So we have to think that, that when we create something, people appreciate. It's very easy to say, international level, but to reach to that level, we have to work hard and we have to have a vision, clear-cut vision. And then the fifth step that I say everywhere, wherever, even the Maritime Museum, they appointed me, So I was telling them from the day one, This is the fifth step, extremely important, and project fails because you can't find the leader. Leadership. Finding leader for the project, because the man, heading the project has to give 24 hours, 365 days. Otherwise, you will compromise the project. So leadership is extremely important. And at this stage, you have to think about that who is going to lead that project and lead the institution. What is the character of a museum? It is a non-profit permanent institution and open to the public, but that doesn't mean that you will not charge entry fees. You have to recover your establishment cost, your maintenance cost, but no commercial exploitation. What is the duty of a museum? In the service of society and its development, and that we should not forget, that we are in the service of society and its development. What are the functions of a museum? Acquisition, conservation, research, communication, and exhibition. And for your information, most of the government museums stopped acquisition. It's a pity, that they stopped acquisition. Except C.S.M.V.S, very few museums acquire art objects, but it has to be continuous. And contemporary history is also important. Archaeology is important, but contemporary history is also equally important, and that is something we cannot ignore. Then the present generation will not forgive us. So that is something we have to see, that how we maintain the balance. And the conservation. You have to have a hospital within the museum to look after your collection. Research, very few people, very few institutes and organizations, they publish. Curators write. So it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy in our country that we could not create enlightened curators. So that is also something we have to think at this stage. And finally, what is the purpose of a museum? Education, study, and enjoyment. Usually we talk, education, study, but enjoyment is also equally important. If you don't enjoy, you don't learn. So I don't want to waste your time. These are some of the thoughts that came in my mind. I thought, this is the first meeting I just shared, and all the best to Tejas and the government and everyone. Thank you.
So thank you very, very much, Sabysachi ji. That was beautifully and very succinctly said. And I completely agree with you that museums must keep acquiring, museums must keep growing. Any museum must be built with growth in mind. And that is something that we have forgotten. And museums are not just places which are go-downs and repositories, but much more. In fact, I would even go a step further and say they're centers of formal learning, as opposed to the centers of informal learning that they are known as today by all of us. So thank you very much, sir. And I now invite former director of the Department of Archaeology and Museums, Maharashtra State, Dr. Arvind P. Jamkhedkar, to come and address us and to share his thoughts with all of us.
How much time is allocated to me? Dr. Dalal, am I?
Yes, sir.
Am I audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. You have 10 minutes, sir.
Thank you. The Honorable Secretary of Culture, Director General of the C.S.M.V.S. Museum, Mumbai, and a galaxy of experts who are present here to deliberate on this new project which has been started by the government of Maharashtra. Mention has already been made that actually a Shri Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj Vastu Sangrahalaya was already proposed to the government of Maharashtra in the 80s. There was a committee headed by Dr. Kal Khandalwala, Dr. M.N. Deshpande, Mr. Gorakshakar, and myself as the secretary. We had proposed a museum of something like 18 galleries at that time. A plot was allotted also in the Bandre village, which later on was probably given to some educational institution. But may I remind you now that, well, there is a plot or at least an area which is suggested in the campus of the University of Bombay, wherein the departments of archaeology and museums, archives, and libraries are supposed to be located. Somehow, because of lack of funds, this also could not materialize. There was another matter which was connected, and I am referring to some remarks made by Dr. Mukherjee, and that is regarding the conservation part of it. In fact, in one of the 5-year plans, it was suggested to all the states that they should have their own conservation laboratory. And that laboratory naturally will address to the needs of the departments of archaeology and museums, archives, and libraries. So that also was supposed to be in the campus of the University of Bombay. Somehow it could not take shape. But with this new project, probably that also can be taken care of. Coming to the idea as to what exactly, why State Museum, Dr. Mukherjee very candidly explained the whole idea. And the basic idea is connected with the self-identity, as he put it. And there were so many other connections with that. Let me say, I will put it in altogether a different way. You see, man is different from the rest of the animal world in 3 ways. It is because of his language, it is because of his technology, and it is because of his fine arts. So these are the 3 things which are connected with any human culture. And therefore, if you are going to depict the culture of Maharashtra, then probably you will have to take into consideration all these aspects. Coming to, as a corollary of the whole thing, coming to and looking at it from the point of view of the state, that is, as it is a state museum and it is going to be run by the government, we'll see that, well, there are something like 7 departments which are supposed to be under the Department of Culture of every state. It will be the archaeology, then museums. These are the different subjects which are there. Archaeology, museums, archives, gazetteers, teaching of fine arts, and then libraries and culture. The culture department in the culture, you can say department, and that is generally the performing arts. So, and I'm reminded again of some of the directives which came from great personalities like Mrs. Indira Gandhi and Mr. Rajiv Gandhi. You see, one of the directives which came during the period of Mrs. Gandhi was that every village should have a museum. Naturally, people started laughing. Well, I remember that when one minister from Hungary had come to India, our minister was talking to him and he said that they have got something like 500 museums. And the minister asked me how many museums are there. Then I had to gather all my information, which I used to do for the Ministry of Culture. And you can say dead, running, somewhat semi-running. There will be hardly 50 museums in Maharashtra at that time. Probably the number has grown now. I agree. So we will have to have a clear idea as to what exactly is National Museum, what is State Museum. The word or the term regional was very loosely used by my friend Tejas Garge. In fact, the divisional headquarters should have something like a regional museum and then district museums. And then we can call the village museums. Now, why all this particular discussion? This discussion was because there was another directive during the time of Rajiv Gandhi, and that clearly said that all these departments of culture, these are non-formal modes of, or you can say media of education, by visiting monuments, by visiting museums, archives, gazetteers, and the information from the gazetteers, and performing arts and so many other things. One gets non-formal knowledge, which is not given in a classroom. Unless this particular knowledge, whether it is from archaeology, museum, or whatever it is reflected in our textbooks. There should be an understanding, and therefore all these 7, you can say, are connected with our educational system itself. So unless all the progress or advancement which is there, so all these 7 units have to work together. That means when you establish a museum, you have to think of all these sides, whether it is archives, you can say gazetteers will include all the, you can say, information regarding a state or something like that. What I mean to say is that whatever is the non-formal way of understanding and imparting instruction and education should be reflected. So it is directly connected with the educational system itself. And therefore, when we talk about a state museum, we will have to be very clear that what exactly is the position of this museum, or what role exactly it is going to play when we know about the National Museum. Unfortunately, there was no policy. Rajiv ji, when he realized, he called for a 3-day seminar. I don't know what exactly happened afterwards, but there was a 3-day seminar where myself and so many other directors, as also my friend Gorakshakar, will present, and we had discussed all these matters. In short, I won't go into all those details. We'll have to take into consideration that when we say that, well, we are an Indian civilization, first of all, we have to clearly say that we are a part of what is called the Asian civilization. When we know that we are an Indian civilization, when we are talking about Maharashtra, then we'll have to know what exactly is the position of Maharashtra, archaeologically or whatever it is, geographically, then historically. So what exactly is the relationship of Maharashtra and what is called pan-Indian civilization? And then we can turn to the lower levels and we can have something like museum corners in various schools. That was the idea probably of Mrs. Gandhi, that, well, every village should have a museum. So museum, as rightly pointed out by Mukherjee, it is for our self-identity. And I have already expressed myself. I won't go into the other details. Probably this is just the beginning of all our discussions. So I won't say, but I'm very glad that it has come now trying to take a concrete form, and let us go further and discuss these matters in details. Thank you very much.
Thank you very, very much, Dr.
The limit.
No, sir, no problem at all. Thank you very, very much, Dr. Jamkhedkar, for that, and for reminding us that this is a long-standing proposal of many governments, and this is something that we should act upon. Better late than never. I'd like to welcome Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya today, and she will be our next speaker. And very, very warm welcome to you, ma'am. And we're looking forward to listening to what you have to say. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kurush. And a very good afternoon to all the erudite scholars and all my friends out here. The basic concept of this museum will be something which I think many of us are looking forward to. And as just now Dr. Jamkhedkar said, this had been under proposal since long. But now if this now materializes, people like me in this generation, we would definitely feel ourselves honored to be a part of this team, so that we can bring forth the various types of hidden treasures of Maharashtra, for which Maharashtra has been known through the ages. Many people have interacted, people across the world, I can say globally, they have interacted, and we definitely need something right from the prehistoric times till the contemporary history, which can showcase the history of Maharashtra in this museum. And museum as such is the symbol or is the mark of any educated society's way of representing itself, whether by ways of the various intangible heritages which are carried forth and carried on in this state, maybe by ways of diorama, etc. We do have Dr. Sabysachi Mukherjee with us. And then we also know that it also speaks a lot about the various types of findings across the state, whatever we do have, and the types of interactions, the types of monuments, and the various, the plethora of information we do have regarding the findings in the state. And I would not like to continue much about this because this is, as opined, is the first meeting that we are meeting for, but would definitely look forward to a grand beginning of this. And I definitely hope that we select a fantastic place to bring this up. And definitely the architecture, because Bihar Museum, I have been there a lot of time. It's a beautiful one. I mean, it's a magnificent museum. I definitely believe many of my other friends would also have seen that. And I cannot talk on comparative terms because now the times are different. So now we are in the present, and then it was, for us, it is a past now. But whatever has been the concept, the types of galleries and the children's room, etc., children's gallery, they are something we should definitely incorporate ideas and the ways in our museum too. And I believe that we will bring forth something which the world will love to visit and see. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, ma'am. And as the regional director for the West has said to us, it is the children's sections that we need to highlight. These are the sections that we need because we've got to catch them young and we've got to keep them keep coming back to our museums. So thank you very, very much, ma'am, for that. Gives me great pride to call our next speaker to the floor. I hope he is with us. I'd like to invite Dr. Vasant Shinde, ex-director of Deccan College, my teacher and guru in many things, including fieldcraft, who's now with Lothal and the Maritime Museum over there. And we really look forward to hearing him speak here too. So Dr. Shinde, the floor is yours. Is Dr. Shinde with us?
No, he's not here today because he has got some family emergency. So he will be speaking in the next conference, next seminar. So we can go to our next speaker.
I'm so sorry to hear that. So thank you very much for that. I'd like the next speaker to come on board. Then we have Dr. Shri Shiv Prasad Kennedy of the N.S.S. Mumbai. And a very, very warm welcome to you, Shiv Prasad ji. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Dalal. It was fascinating. In fact, the whole presentation by Garge ji. The vision is very, very large. In fact, it's quite massive. You know, the way you have run through the whole presentation. And Mr. Mukherjee has again perhaps showed you a complete new perspective as to what the museum in the modern context is. And of course, you have one monumental example before you, which I'm sure Mr. Jhaji will be talking about, Anjani Kumar ji will be talking about the Bihar Museum as a model. So with all these things in mind and the massive vision that was presented, what I have a couple of points to suggest. It's a good thing that you included a museum advisory committee, constituted that, and this consultative process will immensely be helpful in achieving the objective or the goal. But before that, what I thought is I can take the example of our own, the Nehru Science Center here, or for that matter, Tejas ji spoke about the National Museum of Indian Cinema. In fact, we, the National Council of Science Museum, were honored to actually develop that on a turnkey basis. It was basically done by the Nehru Science Center and our head office in Calcutta. So if you really look at these two examples, you will find them that they were done in two phases. The Nehru Science Center, for example, the Science Museum was opened in 1985. But just to keep that interest alive, in the first phase, way back in 1978 and 79, the first phase of it was the park was inaugurated, and then a temporary shed was created just to keep the interest of the people, citizens alive. That's something a large project or the large science museum is going to come up in future. So keeping that central, what we call as a temporary exhibition space, a lot of activities were going on when the main project was being built. So for all of 5 or 6 years during the intervening period when the main project was being executed, this temporary exhibition space was serving as a reminder to all the citizens that some project is going to come up. Same thing happened in the National Museum of Indian Cinema. It was again done in two phases. I think some of you must have seen that. Tejas Garge definitely has seen that. And Mr. Mukherjee was a part of the advisory committee, the museum advisory committee of the National Museum of Indian Cinema. If you really look at that project as well, you had the Gulshan Mahal there, where the first phase of the museum came up, where people really realized that what is going to come up in the second phase. That second phase took almost, I think, about 5-6 years. In a similar manner, I was just suggesting that can this State Museum, the Maharashtra State Museum, be done in two parts? Because identifying a land of about 15 to 20 acres, which Mukherjee spoke about, particularly in a place like Mumbai, which is the land is a premium, it will take some time. Until that time, you can perhaps have some kind of a small place, temporary place, where all the whatever you have talked about. Moreover, you have about 13 regional or a city museum which are existing and working under the archaeology and museum department. Can you actually completely digitize the whole thing, very high level of digital documentation, and then use that as showcasing it as a temporary exhibition site? You need not bring the original things. You can actually, because you also spoke a lot about augmented reality, virtual reality, digital things like that. Can this temporary space be used for that, to create, to sustain that interest among the people of Mumbai, Maharashtra, that a project like this is going to come up in a massive scale, which perhaps might take anything between 5 to 8 years. That's what if you really look at the ambition that you have, it may take about 8 years time to fulfill this ambition. Till such time, this temporary exhibition could be immensely beneficial. Another thing is, for example, if Ajanta, you have a site there. Very recently, Ministry of Culture actually funded what is known as a virtual experiential museum. It's completely based on digital augmented reality, which has been installed and commissioned in the National Museum. Some of you must have seen that. Because you're going to digitize all your objects, I think there should be some kind of a fair amount of money budget allocated to digital documentation, and then have some expert curators to create some kind of a storytelling on the objects collections from all these 13 state museums that you have, so that can be used to put them in what you call as an augmented reality or a virtual reality, or what you call as a virtual experiential museum. That will also help you. I had one other suggestion. It was missing in this presentation, if possible. It is mostly art, archaeology, and culture that you talked about, and maybe including the tribal and things like that. Mumbai, for example, is a place where I would call it as a next only to the Indian science renaissance, which started in Bengal. But the real, what you call the post-independence scientific renaissance started here. You have the TIFR, you have Bhabha Atomic Research Center, even the birth of ISRO. There was a common chairman of atomic energy and space. It actually started in Mumbai. So is it possible that you can also expand slightly and include this in your concept? There's another thing. You're talking about restoration conservation lab. Nowhere in the country you have a lab which uses state-of-the-art technologies for art authentication. You have an Aadhaar here. My iris is recorded, my fingerprint is recorded, all my fingerprints are recorded, and then my identity is there in the digital domain. In a similar manner, each of the art objects, can we have different technologies? Because illicit culture trafficking happens extensively because the provenance is not established. The documentation is not there. We only need experts in the field. Using their own eyes, they will say that, you know, it belongs to this, it's a original or it's a duplicate. But then you have so many technologies. You have X-ray, you have Raman spectroscopy, you have, I mean, so many technologies are there. And then you have institutions like Tata Institute of Fundamental Research here, Bhabha Atomic Research Center here. Nowhere in India it is there. Even the Ministry of Culture, they wanted to do this, but it has not happened. Is this possible that in a larger vision that you have, can this also find a place in the restoration lab and restoration culture conservation lab, and then can you promote this? These are some of my initial thoughts, and I would like to compliment and congratulate the state, Tejas Gargeji, who has organized this, and all the other stakeholders, Dalalji, of course, Mr. Mukherjee is spearheading this. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. And from our side, we are good in implementing digital technologies. And then we have about 25 science centers across the country. We use all this artificial intelligence for, augmented reality. We have in-house experts to do this. It will be an honor for us to be of any support. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. That was a much needed wake up on the documentation of our heritage in a way that is digitized so that it cannot be misplaced, appropriated, so on and so forth. In fact, I think it might be a good idea if we all looked at the portable antiquity scheme of the British Museum, where every single object in Britain is brought in regularly by those who find them, work with them, and own them. And you get a PAS number from the museum. And today, no antiquities dealer in England will touch an object if it doesn't have a PAS number, which has recorded its complete and total provenance. So something like this, you know, perhaps if Dr. Mukherjee and the other museologists could spearhead a project like this, it would truly be a fascinating addition to the kind of work that they're doing. So thank you very, very much, sir, for what you've said. And this brings me to, I think, the final speaker today. And we have Anjani Kumar Singh ji from the Bihar Museum, whose museum has been talked about so much as the ideal museum to emulate in today's day and age. So I will ask him to come on board and to take the stage and to share his views with us. Dr. Anjani Singh.
A very good afternoon from Bihar Museum. I'm very happy to know that Government of Maharashtra is planning to make a state museum. Because if you see in post-independent period, very few museums came in government sector. Few museums came in private sector, but if you see the government sector, very few museums came. It created many types of problems. Most of our museums are either British, pre-independence, or collections of Raja Maharajas. But in government sector, it was a big, huge gap. Bihar had many museums. We had a state museum, we had district level museums, but they were just storehouses of artifacts. So that was the background. Because when we wanted to showcase our glorious history, everybody was saying that when Patliputra was capital of India, India was bigger than what it is today. But how to convey this? How to bring the pride, the people of Bihar, how to brand Bihar? So that was our main objective of putting otherwise we had a Patna museum, but the display was very bad. Visitors' experience was very poor. It was not able to convey what we wanted to convey. So that was in the background of making a new museum, Bihar Museum. Then the problem of naming it. Somebody said that it should be International Museum, Asian Museum, this museum, that museum. But we realized that we are doing this museum in 2000. It started, of course, 2012-13, and it took 6-7 years to get completed. But then we thought that it can be a way to connect Bihar with India and India with the world. That's why we removed that international or state everything. We said just Bihar Museum. And because we are showing the Bihari diaspora also, how Biharis went outside and created many countries like Mauritius, Jamaica, Suriname, many places. So we wanted to bring that story also, because we were developing that in the core, it was identity of Bihar, Bihari identity. So that objective has to be very clear. That is my first point. Second point, when you are going to have a museum, then it is very essential to talk to the stakeholders, the historians, the architects. We had a huge consultation with children because we have a very young population. We thought that a very large number of our visitors will be children. We have a scheme also in government where we support schools to bring children to historical archaeological places, to museums, etc. So children were going to be our one of the main component of visitors. So there was emphasis on children. So we talked to children, what do you want to be kept in the museum? Then artists, art community, media, etc. Because all those people, so it was, right from the beginning, we took almost 6 months to consult all these people, to just talk to them. Then we had some concept outline, but we filled those gaps from the input from them. I'll give you one example. Like when we were planning to what should be the entry fee in the museum. So everybody said it's a poor estate. Politicians were saying no, it should be 10 rupees enough. In all government museums, it's 10, 20 rupees. But the feedback we had that if you're making an international museum of that quality, let it be charged properly. So now we have 100 rupees as entry fee. And there's no news in the newspaper, nobody came and complained. Because I'm involved with this museum for the last 8 years. Second part was, it was a big project, it was a huge project, and my chief minister has a very clear vision that it will get a very high priority in a scheme of things. So in the center of Patna, there were 4 or 5 government bungalows, ministers' bungalows. They were demolished, and we had almost 14, 15 acres of land because we wanted to give it a central location because it was going to be our brand. So it has to be centrally located. So we removed those buildings, those government buildings, and then that became the site for our museum. We had, because then another problem that comes is if you want to make an international museum, who has that international experience? Because we know that in post-independent area, not many museums came. So we didn't have that type of experience. Like when you go for materials, you go for fabrication, there is a huge gap. There is no company in India who will give you the glasses, the light, those type of things. And if you go international for any of these things, then the rule says that you have to have an Indian partner. So you may have a great international vendor, but because of that Indian partner, you will have variety of problems. So that was a huge gap. So that gap had to fill. Luckily, we had a good concept consultant, Lord Cultural Resources, and they brought that international practice, like how we are going to select the architect. What is that international jury? Who will be the part of that jury? So there was an international jury for selecting our architect. And you will be surprised, 26 very good architects throughout the world, from all over the world they participated. We shortlisted 5, and from 5 we selected 1. That was possible only because we went for international competition. So that is again, I'm not saying that foreigner, outsider companies should be taken. Our Indian companies are also coming up and they are doing very nice works. Many of the works in Bihar are being done by Indian architects and of equally good standard. That Sabysachi ji indicated that point, that leadership, that is very important. Here it was my chief minister's leadership. And that time I was secretary education when I was made nodal officer for this project. So after that secretary education, I became secretary to my chief minister. Then I became chief secretary of the state for 4 years. And then I'm advisor to government. But for last 8-9 years, I'm continuing as nodal officer. So that type of continuity is required. What happens in government, when the government changes or the secretary changes or nodal officers changes, suddenly you will find a huge jolt. So for that smooth running, that whole thing, because it will not be possible to make in 3 or 5 years. I'm going to tell you, whoever says it will take 7, 8 years minimum. Because when I was trying to hurry up, my architect and my consultant will tell me that no good museum of international standard was done in 3 or 5 years. Not like making a bridge or making a big road that you will do it in 3 to 5 years, not possible. Because it's evolving thing. Many things there are a variety of problems, many things will have to deal, something will be not in your control. Still, because of the pandemic, we have some little problems we are not able to solve. So that type of continued leadership, maybe of one person, maybe of group of person, but not a huge, big group of person. And that person has to be fairly senior, because you will have to coordinate with various departments. You will have to, because the finance department should listen to him, the building department should listen to him, the culture department should listen to him or her. But so that fairly senior person or that team will be required for doing this standard of work. And you have that Lord Cultural Resources, Batul is part of this group. And she had seen the whole process right from the beginning. And my concept consultant was right from the beginning till the end of it. So I had a person as a international expertise to see where we are, where we are going this way or that way, and correcting the course and bringing on the right path. So you will need some that type of team which will oversee execution of that project. And my 1 or 2 last points are that one major change was when we are talking about galleries, whether it should be dynasty-wise or how it should be, we found that the storytelling idea is the best idea. Because people are not just going to see that physical object standing there for a minute or a few seconds and then move, just like physical objects. No, there has to be some story which excites them, which allows them to interact, and which gives some excitement or happiness to the visitor. So that storytelling approach is required. Another dimension that has come very prominently now because of this pandemic and all those things, and the new generation is more on mobile, iPad, computer, etc. So now that virtual component has to be very important. That we are realizing now that it has to be equally, it will not be like US or France or UK, where like UK, State Britain has 90% virtual visitors. We will never have. I don't want also, because I want people to come to the museum, enjoy our events and activities, and then experience what is there. They should be happy. Seeing any event sitting on your chair or sitting on your bed, on your computer or a mobile is a completely different experience. We developed this Bihar Museum as a culture center. So that was a small story that I wanted to tell you. If you have any questions, they are very welcome, and there will be all support from us whenever, whatever you want, and wherever we are, because I am very happy. I want many more museums to come in various states, because we have very rich history, and that rich history has to be showcased to the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ashwini-ji. That was, of course, very succinctly said. And I think, yes, Batul from Lord is with us today. In fact, I did invite her to come and join in today. So I hope that she will be telling us what she feels. Folks, INSTUCEN Trust, INSTUCENTRUST@gmail.com. Please send in your ideas, concepts, comments. We will be happy to compile them and forward them to the Directorate of Archaeology and Museums so that they won't be lost in this chat. We humbly request you to write in to us so that we may be able to document and put the whole thing together for Dr. Garge and the rest of the team. And so, as I said, do definitely write in to us and send it in to us so that we'll be able to help you with it. So I think that rounds up today's list of speakers. It is my very happy duty to propose a vote of thanks. I would like to thank a lot of people who've been instrumental in making this happen. Of course, there is the ministry, Dr. Garge's entire team, Dr. Mayur Thakare, and of course, all the speakers and the members who have been co-opted by the government. There are, of course, all those of you all who have taken your time out today to be part of this session and whose comments we really sincerely look forward to, because they do help us open all kinds of avenues that we might not have considered. Finally, of course, Dr. Mugdha Karnik, Karnik, and the entire team of trustees at the India Study Center Trust, who are so absolutely thrilled to be a part of this initiative. And this is something that we have also longed for very much. I think all of the speakers, and if I went to list them all, I would probably have to take up another hour or two of time. But to quickly say it, Dr. Mukherjee's speech did resonate very well with what Dr. Garge said, and it did add certain dimensions. Dr. Jamkhedkar reminded us of this initiative in the past and how it is finally coming to fruition. Dr. Nandini Bhattacharya was crisp and to the point, and we're very grateful to her. As the A.S.I. representative, I think her help and the help of her organization will be critical. We also feel that Dr. Kenneth and what he said about the science aspect of things is also something that should be considered, because if it's a Museum of Maharashtra, then every single one of these aspects of Maharashtra should definitely be a part and parcel and should be represented at the museum. This is not just Maharashtra's cultural heritage, but Maharashtra's heritage in toto. Anjani ji, of course, is the shining light of what we can do, and his support also is critically important in furthering this. We've got a lot of other people here with us, and we hope that this becomes a series of very fruitful discussions and gatherings and further workshops like this, and we can bring something concrete to the board in the soonest possible manner. I cannot finish without congratulating Dr. Tejas Garge for, being at the helm at this very, very correct time for this very, very important addition to the culture, the history, and the heritage of Maharashtra. So thank you very much. And of course, finally, a big thank you to the INSTUCEN team behind Riddhi, Yogini, Tanaya, Gaurangi, Alan, and so many of you all, Ria, and so many of you all who are there. No, I'm not mentioning all of you all, but that will just, be blowing our own trumpet. But thank you for pulling off a very successful meeting and a very successful streaming live on YouTube. Thank you very much, everybody. And we look forward to seeing you all at the next meeting. In case Dr. Garge would like to say a couple of words, or we will then close today's session. Dr. Garge.
Thank you, Dr. Dalal. I'm really indebted to Dr. Sabysachi, Anjani Kumarji, whose experience is going to lead us to our path, which is little in the darkness today, but I think with more and more light that you shared with your experience, the path will become more and more clear in the future. And this is not a single hand task for any person or an institution. We need to have a large scale thinking group on this scale, which can actually bring that museum into a proper shape. So thank you all for your contribution. And as the think tank is quite large, we are more than 20 in numbers. So we divided these deliberations in 2 Saturdays. So we are hoping to have all of you back on next Saturdays for the views and comments of the remaining experts in the committee. And I also take this opportunity to thank my own team along with INSTUCEN, in Directorate, and all the people who are actually handling these museums in these difficult times, especially my curators throughout the states, even the attendants who are taking pain to objects clean, neat. I thank the entire team of Directorate of Archaeology and Museums. I thank Dr. Jamkhedkar for being our constant moral support, and Dr. Mugdha, Karnik, Kurush, and entire INSTUCEN team. Thank you very much, and hoping to see you on next Saturday. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I think we'll call it a day now.
Yes.
And we'll try and save all the comments also. And like I said, please send them in to institucentrust@gmail.com. Thank you very, very much. We look forward to seeing you all next Saturday. Take it away, please, Riddhi. Let's shut down for the day.